Our first session in the, well, this isn't our first session actually. This is our second session in a series of webinars on working with parents, carers and families. And it's all about making those conversations count. We are very fortunate this afternoon to have Tanya Tira-Oro with us from Special Needs Jungle. And I'll say a bit more about Tanya and Special Needs Jungle in a minute. Also on the slide, we have the Q&R codes. So to encourage you and your colleagues to join as a member of the Whole School Send community and to sign up for the monthly newsletter. And also we have a link to our events page, because our event this afternoon is one of a series of events that we have running throughout the autumn term and into the spring term as well. So the way that we're going to organise this session is that I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about Whole School Send and about the importance that we place on positive relationships with parents, carers and families. We're then going to hand over to Tanya, and then I'm then going to provide some more resources which are just to highlight some of the many resources that we've got on the Send Gateway which are relevant to this theme. So whilst I've been talking, I hope you've had the opportunity to read the slide, which just highlights the Whole School Send contract aims. So I'll just give you a minute to have a look at that. Okay, and then moving on, because we do have a lot to get through this afternoon. Many of you will know that we have a new CEO for NASON, Anna-Marie Hassel. And I just want to highlight the importance that Anna-Marie as CEO places on this theme. Anna-Marie, prior to becoming the CEO of NASON, was the Director of Practice and Programmes at the National Children's Bureau. And she was involved in the 100 Conversations work, which was about gathering evidence on the hopes and concerns of parents and laying down a range of challenges in terms of what support should look like for families. And secondly, Alex Grady, who is the head of Whole School Send. And here we've got an excerpt from a blog that Alex wrote for Special Needs Jungle, actually in January of this year. And I'll just give you a minute to read that. And I really do like that line, to ask for, to listen to, and to act upon the views and wishes of the young people at the centre of the SEND system. And then our Whole School Send values. And I just want to further reinforce the value of collaboration and the emphasis that we put on this. And once again, I ask you to read this. And thank you. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Tanya, but just to introduce Tanya, she is the founder and co-director of Special Needs Jungle, which many of you will know provides articles and resources for people living or working with children and young people with special educational needs, rare diseases and health. So at that point, I am going to stop sharing my slides and hand over to Tanya. But before she starts, and while she gets her slides up on the screen, I'd also like to introduce Francesca. Francesca and I are going to be following the chat whilst Tanya speaks, and we will be responding to your questions at various stages throughout this session. So thank you, Tanya, and over to you.
Thank you, and hello everybody. Good afternoon. I hope your day has gone quite well so far. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and we'll start from the beginning. So I've called this the 7 C's of working with parents, and you will find out why as we go on. There's plenty of opportunity in this webinar for you to get involved. I'm going to be asking questions, and I'd really love to hear what your points of view are. You may kind of be thinking, well, you know, I work with parents every day and their children. What do I need to know? You might know everything, in which case, fantastic. And you might find out some interesting things, not just from me, but from your colleagues on the call. But let's start off by looking at the situation in SEND today, the 2021 figures, which came out earlier this year. So there are about 1.4 million children with some kind of special educational need, which is 15.8%, which is a slight rise on last year. It's the highest proportion of pupils with SEND since the 2014 SEND reforms, but it's still much lower than in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, when over 20% of pupils were identified with SEND. 3/4 of these pupils are on SCN Support. That's roughly 1.1 million pupils in all. That's pupils without any HCP. In all, 12.1 of the school population is on SCN Support, which is a barely visible increase on last year. In 2020, 3.3 of all school pupils had an EHCP. This year, it's 3.7. So that looks like a small increase, but the number of school pupils with an EHCP has risen by over 10% in a single year, and it's 37.5% bigger than it was 5 years ago. So where are these children? So over 80% of pupils with SEND attend a state-funded mainstream school or nursery. A further 6% with SEND go to a non-specialist independent school. So most pupils are getting supported primarily from mainstream school budgets. The drift of pupils with the HCPs that we had been seeing from mainstream schools to special schools has slowed in the last couple of years, but mostly because state special schools are absolutely full. At the start of this year, for the first time in many years, over half of school pupils with EHCPs were in state mainstream. So what are the most common types of SEND? As you can see at the top there, that's speech, language and communication, SLCN, is the most common type of primary SCN in state schools. That's almost 295,000 pupils were listed as having SLCN as a primary special educational need in early 2021. Social, emotional and mental health needs, SEMH, was the second most prevalent category. For pupils with EHCPs, autistic spectrum disorder is the most common type of SEN identified in special schools. Remember that many children will cover more than one type of need. It's concerning to see, though, that nearly 95,000 state school pupils are on the SCN register without any sort of clearly identified need. Either their need hasn't been clearly diagnosed, or they've been put on the SCN register for some other reason. So the message is, if you suspect a child has an SCN, you're not expected to be an expert. So call in the external experts. This is what it says in the SEND Code of Practice. The EdPsych, the SLT, the OT or CAMS, call them in early to make sure that the right support is being put into place, because otherwise you're wasting your time, and crucially, you're wasting the time of that child. And of course, speak to parents to help you discover what may be happening in their world outside of what's going on in the classroom. So if you have any suggestions to add, we'll be asking for those for later on. So let's look at what is working with parents all about. What do we mean by that? So it's called co-production. It's kind of a nebulous phrase. It's used in many different circumstances, but what it isn't is consultation, which is seeking the parental opinion, which can then be ignored. That seems to be what the Department for Education think of as co-production, but it isn't. It's also not participation, that is taking part in the debate or a Q&A. It is when all team members work together on an equal basis and agree outcomes. That means they're at the decision-making table and they make the choices and the decisions along with you. In the Code of Practice, it talks quite a lot about co-production. A couple of quotes here. Parents' views are important during the process of carrying out an EHC needs assessment and drawing up or reviewing an EHC plan in relation to a child. And LAs, earlier provided in school, should enable parents to share their knowledge about their child and give them confidence that their views and contributions are valued and will be acted upon. At times, parents, teachers and others may have differing expectations of how needs are best met. And I understand quite well that that might be very difficult sometimes because not every parent is up there willing to help. Some parents you might wish were less willing to help. But it's in the Code of Practice, it's the law, and you really need to do it. And 1.7 in the Code of Practice, sometimes these discussions can be challenging, but it is the child's best interest for a positive dialogue between parents, teachers and others to be maintained, to work through points of difference and establish what action to be taken. I did give a presentation a while ago in Bristol and to some Senkos, and one Senko came to me and said, do you know, I have a family who was really difficult. They didn't want to engage with me. They were, you know, really, really difficult to talk to, but I stuck to it. I didn't give up. I kept going back because it was not about me or about them. It was about the child. And over years and years, she's been doing this. She said, it's still hard, but we've now come to a measure of trust. So we're both putting the child first and we are moving forward. So, so that's how important it really is. In the SCN Code of Practice, you can find that at this link. You'll be getting a copy of these slides. But you should see in the circled bit there, you will find at those links guides for changes to the system, which you should all know by now, an easy read guide for parents that you can forward to parents, easy read guide for older children and young people, and a guide for parents and carers. There is also a guide specifically for school staff and for Senkos as well. And the second link underneath that is a direct link to the legislation. So how can you work better with parents? So you really need to understand that the system now is person-centered and not service-centered. Now, this is really hard because the local authority still is service-centered. It's like, what can you have? We haven't got that, so you can't have it. But it is person-centered. So that's where your thinking needs to start. And of course, there are going to be lots of other demands on you, and you will be told by other school staff or local authority staff that you can't have it. But I know many Senkos are really creative when it comes to supporting children with SEN within the bounds of what they are physically able to do and the time that they have. Think about how you come across to parents when meeting or talking to them. You know, language and voice tone and expression are as important as what you say, particularly with some parents whose confidence is a lot less. You know, many also have some kind of learning disability themselves or learning difficulty themselves. And they can be really intimidated, which can come across as anger or fear or, you know, hostility to them. So it's, you know, it's down to you to be the authority figure and the team leader. I remember myself when I was taking my children to their mainstream school that, you know, even though the teacher was half my age, I would still be calling them miss, and, you know, they were the authority figure for me as well, because they were in charge of my child at that particular time. So again, I understand you're only human. It's difficult to do it sometimes, but it's important to stress that you, the teaching assistant and the parent, are a team around the child, and everybody is part of Team Child. So it's easy to feel like you have to defend your position, and a parent will also feel like they have to defend their position as well. So if you can take a deep breath and think, you know, how did I come across to that parent? You know, why did they respond like that to me? And, you know, maybe that will help things with those not so easy parents in the future. And they maybe come across as not so easy, but for so many reasons. You know, maybe they're having difficulty putting food on the table. Maybe they're going through a difficult marital situation. Maybe there is some kind of domestic abuse that you don't know about. Maybe somebody in their family has just died, or maybe they're just so worried about their child and they don't know what to do about it. So they've come to you, but it's come out in a way that maybe they didn't intend. And the last one here is, I'm sure something that you should be well aware of these days after the pandemic, using an app like Class Dojo or WhatsApp to communicate with them. Tell them the good things as well, not just the bad things when they've had a good day. And smile, you improve the gritted teeth when you see them, because it does always count and can be quite disarming. So work cooperatively with kindness, understanding and consideration, as I mentioned, of the family's challenges. Really keep good notes of each time that you talk to them as well. And we know how frustrating it is if we go and see somebody, a medical professional, for a second or third time, and they don't remember what you said. That's how it is for family as well. So try and keep good notes and reminders of your last actions. And proactively keep in touch, let them know how things are going, when things are going well. Develop a list of resources from yours and others' experience. So sometimes, like if a parent goes to you first of all and says, you know, I'm really worried, or I don't have anyone else to talk to. If you've got the list of that local parent group or the local SENDIAS or the local parent carer forum, to say, well, I've got this list here. Why don't you go and have a look at that? And maybe there's some things that can help you with allay your fears, or can help you understand where to go, as well as me helping you too. That's a really helpful thing to do. Obviously, tell them about Special Needs Jungle, and be kind, because it's always possible to be kind. So now I just wonder if you've got any ideas of your own that you would like to put in. Francesca, have you seen anything on that, or is everybody stunned into silence? So we'll move on then to the 7 C's. So this is something I've developed that it's kind of a catchy thing, you know, we all like catchy things. So it's compassion, communication, care, creativity, culture change, that's a big one, commitment and control. So going back to compassion, is see the difficulties they experience through their eyes, and not the eyes of a budget, someone else's convenience, or your own personal judgments. Because as I said earlier, you don't know what they're going through. And it's all about that child and not about them. Information needs to be really easily available to those and not be ambiguous at all. Many parents only have a mobile phone, if that, to read that information. So if you imagine that's what they're reading on, then maybe when you're writing your notes to parents or whatever, then you can think about how they're going to be able to read it, and may use shorter sentences, make it easy to understand. Watch out where you're putting that comma, because it can change the meaning of the entire sentence. And when we're busy, it's really easy to forget how our contact will be received again. So yeah, watch out for that. It's something I've learned myself many times about, you know, why did they react that way? Because I'm autistic myself. And so it's taken me quite a while to be able to sit there and go, oh yeah, so if somebody said that to me in that way, I might have been a bit cross as well. So remember, a parent isn't asking for a favor. They are asking for what their child is entitled to and needs to meet their aspirations and ambitions. And they want the same things for their child as every other parent does. You could ask the parents to help you communicate with them, ask them what works for them. You know, don't guess. The this is what co-production is all about, you know, meet them halfway or meet them 3/4 of the way, or even meet them all the way if they're finding things that much more difficult. Get to know them, maybe create some private aid memoir sheets, you know, so if you have a meeting with, so, you know, she's father's just died or something like that, something you can remind yourself to pull up, and when you speak to them, that can help you, you know, even first of all saying, oh, how are you since this happened? Because, you know, I know that you've got 30 kids in your class, and maybe more, depends on the kind of school you are, that you're seeing every day. It's hard to remember those things. Parents aren't the enemy, which they can often feel like, I think, if they are coming at you with an angry attitude, maybe, or when you feel you've done the best you can and it's not made them happy. I'm speaking here as a parent because I've been through all these emotions myself as a parent. But again, you take it away from the personal, we're on the side of the child, to take everybody's ego out of the equation. But they do expect that you understand the law, and that the law trumps local authority policies every single time, which is why I gave you the links to the to those legislation, to the code of practice. We are going through a review at the moment, because clearly SEND is in a bit of a parlous state. So the Department for Education and the new Minister, Will Quince, are looking at how these things can be improved, and happily we're part of that conversation. So we're putting forward the things that we think should be improved. Commit to remembering the importance of the child or young person and their parents to help them take part in decisions. Some parents will be like me. They will, you know, be forthright. They will understand what the law is. They will understand what is possible. Some parents will not. Some parents will not even want to come into school because they've had really bad experiences about them when they were at school themselves. So, you know, try to be supportive, try to be friendly. Again, I've said all the way through, I'm not saying that this is easy, but it needs to be done to help the child. In the code of practice, it says that parents know their children best. It's important all professionals listen and understand what parents express concerns about their child's development. So those are the 7: compassion, communication, care, creativity, commitment, control, and I've lost that last one because it's culture change, of course. That's one of the big difficulties, is culture change. And that's not just from schools, that's from local authorities in particular. Again, anybody got their own ideas about those? Maybe those headlines have spurred some inspiration in you? Because what's coming up now is really a chance for you to use your experience to help the other parent or other teachers on the call, on the webinar. I've got a series of scenarios. I will run through afterwards our own top tips, but I'd love to hear yours, because quite often when we hear yours, we get other ideas that we can add in for other webinars. So Mrs. Miller is very anxious about her son Josh, who she says is acting up at home and having after school meltdowns. But at school, you don't see anything that the parent is saying. Josh is quiet and he's compliant, and you don't see any educational issues. So you've tried to reassure her that you don't see an issue, but the parent will not accept it and wants an educational psychologist to assess her son. What would you advise the class teacher to do?
Okay, we've got one comment. Thank you, Ben, who's saying to ask the family to keep a diary of the events.
That's a really good idea. And particularly if the school does the same thing, then you can marry them up and see if there are any correlations.
And Ben says that then you can look at potential triggers as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. With my child, my younger child, they would save everything up during the school day because they didn't want to get into trouble. So as soon as they got home in a safe space, it would come out in a meltdown or an angry outburst or hitting their sibling. And you think, where on earth does that come from? But it was something that had been triggered earlier on in the school day that maybe hadn't been noticed by school, by the teacher, something that had happened kind of off to one side. One particular event was my child spilt their lunch tray. Everything went everywhere. They were really upset, but nobody told me this until they got home and had a complete meltdown. So I was able to go and say, well, what's gone on? Because somebody had noted that, they were able to say, oh, actually, this is what happened. So we could see that, you know, anxiety and upset was one of their triggers. Anything else?
Yes, Jane is saying that she would complete a social communication toolkit and to try a decompress like blob trees or anxiety gremlin at the end of the day, and also to see if sensory circuits at the end of the day might help. And we've got another comment from Mary to everyone, and she has said, it's the same with my child. My son with ASD lets it all out at home. It is a release. So we've got lots of parents who are saying that. Ben adds to that by saying anniversaries of particular trauma may also trigger events.
Quite. So, you know, and when we're talking about trauma as well, I think it's a far bigger issue than many people are aware of at the moment in schools. I mean, that's why they're now doing specific courses for, you know, dealing with trauma and that kind of thing. I think we've only just, you know, seen the tip of the iceberg, particularly post-pandemic, when, you know, children may have lost grandparents or even parents or other family members in the most traumatic ways, but they don't have a way to let that out. I share something about my granddad died when I was 12 in front of me, just out of the blue, just dropped dead. I was like sick for days, physically sick for days, but nobody mentioned it to school, and the trauma of that hit me for years and years, and my grades suffered, but yet there was no support for that. It was just like, well, put it to one side and move on. I hope that we've come a long way since then, but yeah, so you don't really know unless somebody tells you, unless you've got that relationship with the parents. They don't say, you know, you need to know what else is going on so that you can see maybe what's caused those issues. Anything else, or shall I move on?
I do like some of the comments from Jane, who talked about trying to provide some support for the child before they go home, to support the parents as well. You know, the idea of using a social communication toolkit in school. As she said, using anxiety gremlin and strategies like that, because it's not easy for parents, is it, Tanya, when your child comes home? And, you know, it's a really challenging thing.
Especially if you've got more than one child who's got ASD, which is, you know, quite common. I do. Mine are grown up now. And but yeah, when your attention is drawn more than one way, I would have one child who'd be sitting on the wall, refusing to move, and the other child who'd be skipping away, refusing to stop. So it's really difficult to, you know, stop and to deal with both of those things at the same time. Talking about anxiety gremlin, these books are by JKP. I think there is the anxiety gremlin, the depression gremlin, and I think there is another one about is there an anger gremlin or something? There is a series of these books anyway that are they're workbooks that you can get from JKP as well.
And Jane has gone on to list some of the strategies that they use in her school, and what she's saying is reinforcing what you've already said, Tanya, is that there's been huge demand in schools since COVID. So this is an area of need at the moment that we're seeing right across the country, I think.
I mean, the government has put more money into this, but whether you see that, on the coalface within the schools, whether any of that trickles down to you is another matter. I know many SENCOs say they never actually see a budget at all. So the delegated budget goes elsewhere. And this is something that we're also discussing with the Department for Education as well. Plus the fact that this £6,000, this mythical £6,000, hasn't changed since, for the last 10 years, 15 years. And it should be far more than that per child who needs it before, just so that you can help them at an earlier stage. They do understand that it's early intervention counts, but if you don't have the funds within your school, or you can't call the ed psyching because you're told, oh, we're out of budget this year, how are you supposed to do that? So our top tips are, you're right, they bottle up their emotions. Ben came right, ask them to keep a diary of their child's mood. Just sit down simply and ask them, what's bothering them the next day, or have a chat with the parent to try and figure it out, the two of them. And then there's that quote again from the SEN Code of Practice. Scenario 2, the multidisciplinary team meeting. So you're in a multidisciplinary team meeting for an EHCP. Present are the parent, the child, who's 10, for half of the meeting, the SENCO or teacher, an LA case officer, if you're lucky, and maybe even a speech and language therapist. So the questions are, how would you introduce the child's parent? Why would it not be appropriate to introduce the parent as mum or dad? And how would you run the meeting so the parent feels their input is valued and included?
Okay, lots of things to think about there. People would like to add to the chat, and I will share the chat as this comes through.
So how would you introduce the child's parent to start off with? I'll give you a clue. Ask them to introduce themselves. So you find out and ask how they would subsequently like to be addressed, because they may have, a different surname, which you may or may not know about. And if they say, please use my first name, ask them to use your first name. So it's a level playing field, but don't ever say mum or dad, because they're not your mum or your dad. This is terrible, but the medical profession do this all the time. Mum says, you can call Billy's mum, Sandra, that's okay, but not as mum says or dad says. And another quote there from the Code of Practice, which we've already mentioned, but it's worth mentioning again. They should enable parents to share their knowledge about their child. Because sometimes, if a parent has not got very much confidence, or they're very quiet, if you just ask them for their views, ask them some questions in a way as if you're, addressing one of your team members or a colleague, then that can give them a lot more confidence to say something. They can feel, oh, okay, so and changes the balance of power, so they feel less like they're on trial themselves, because quite often they can feel like it's their fault, or they can feel like you think it's their fault. Is there any other ideas for that one?
We've got Jane, who says, I introduce parents as Mr. and Mrs., but if we're on first name terms, as I am with most of my parents who have an EHCP, it reverts to first names. I talk to all of the parents of children with plans all the time, and they call me Jane. after I have, in most cases, helped them to get the EHCP, including mediation and tribunal, we start with parents. So I think it's about having that established relationship that Jane is saying. I'm wondering, Tanya, what's your, in the past, I've always, when I was a SENCO, I would offer parents a planning meeting for a multi-professional meeting where we would maybe highlight some of these points and talk a little bit about the format of the meeting. What's your feeling about things like that?
I think that's actually a really good idea, particularly when it's those parents who are new to the whole SEND world, or who you think may not have a lot of confidence to speak up, to help them, you know, make a list of points that they want to, a list of bullet points that they want to raise, things they've noticed, and at the end of the meeting to say, you know, Mrs. or whatever your name is, have you mentioned all your points? So, you know, be their cheerleader to help them make the points that they need to make, because no matter what their own education is, they love their child and they want their child to have the support that they need. So again, I know it's hard, it's particularly for those parents who really had a bad experience themselves and who don't want to come into school and who don't want to participate. But a bit of hand-holding can make all the difference to the child. I can't stress enough how important it is to, you know, leave egos at the door, take a deep breath and be the bigger person. Just because, you know, it's about the child.
Okay.
So Jack, here's Jack, he's 7. He's having difficulties with his reading. His mum is a lone parent, but she's not able to come to parents' evenings very often. And while you may have already put in some relevant support, you'd like help from home to reinforce his learning. But you've sent letters home and you left him a phone message about this, but you've had no response. Jack walks to school with his older brother. He says his mum doesn't have time to read to him as she works 2 jobs and his dad's not around right now. How would you help his mum to engage? I bet Jane's got an idea, and Ben.
Yeah.
Jane sounds like the kind of person we need to have a post from on Special Needs Jungle.
Yes. I don't think we've got any comments as yet.
Because it's a difficult one, isn't it? When you think you've done as much as you can. Luckily, we've got some ideas. So when families are under pressure for various reasons and they can be suffering extreme stress, just keep trying. Just keep trying to make contact, or ask reception staff to help, or ask the child and older sibling to pass on a message with a phone number or an email address. You could offer to meet in a neutral location if they can't come to school and if they don't want a home visit for, you know, it could be that they're embarrassed about where they live. It could be that they're in temporary accommodation. So, you know, say, how about a local cafe or something, you know, offer to buy them a cup of coffee at a local cafe and they can have a chat. You might get a different response. Avoid long letters with lots of text. Local authorities are terrible at this. When they send letters about, particularly about EHCPs, you know, nobody's got time to read 3 pages of closely typed text. And you've forgotten what they're talking about by the time you get to the end of the 3rd page. So yeah, avoid that. When you meet, tell the parent the good things first. So when you're making that contact or you're leaving that message, say some good things and don't use acronyms. Give them resources they can follow up, web links, so local support. I said this before, the parent may have their own learning difficulties, and they may be dyslexic, or, you know, just have other medical or health conditions that just makes them, it just means that they've got no mental headspace for anything, but they need to have, because it's their child and it is their responsibility, but you can do a lot to help. So think of inclusive ways to communicate. Those easy read things that I sent you, the the links for. So hopefully, that can help. Explain the importance of working together, and see if you can just message them on WhatsApp or something like that. If you don't want to give your own phone number away, maybe the school's got a WhatsApp that you can use, or something like that. And quite often also, and how the school puts out a school's bulletin. I'm not sure how every local authority works, but Surrey, where my children were going to school, would put out a school's bulletin. Now, some of those things on that school bulletin were specifically for parents. Please pass this on to your parent. And depending on which school they went to, maybe that parent would never hear that. So it could be an idea just to copy and paste that into a text or a WhatsApp message. This has just come through, thought it might be of interest to you. So just to help. So scenario 4, you're putting a child on SCN support to help address their learning difficulties. The SCN Code of Practice says parents should be a part of the team. How do you make this happen? Now, I can't believe that there's going to be no ideas about that, because there has to be an idea. You've got to have an idea of how you think that you can help parents be part of the team. What have you done already? Or what have you thought about doing, but you've encountered a barrier to achieving what you wanted to achieve? Because if you ask that question, maybe somebody else has got an answer for that.
I don't have any comments in the chat as yet.
How would you do it, Erica?
I wouldn't put a child on SCN support unless I had a meeting with the parent beforehand, because the whole point of the graduated approach is that it's assess, plan, do, review. And I would have expected there to be at least one, if not more, meetings beforehand. That might not be with me. If I was supporting a primary school, that might well be with the class teacher. In a secondary school, I think it is more likely to be with the SENCO, if I'm honest, but it might have been with the tutor. And then I think I'd be having a meeting with the parent to just talk through the code and to talk through what it means to be on SCN support. We've actually got a really good leaflet about what that means, which I'm sure Francesca, it's an ask, listen, do a leaflet, which Francesca will put in the chat. But I notice we do have a couple of comments now, Tanya. So first of all, it's, let me see, it's about, wait a minute, let me just come to this. Wait a minute, I'm just moving down the chat a bit. Wait a moment, I seem to have just lost that. Wait a moment, let me get there. 2 new messages, here we are. Move that up. One thing that someone that I think it's Ben has said, I think that with the change from School Action Plus to SCN support, a lot of the support is more watered down and less tracked. Sometimes schools may begin to implement interventions ahead of the threshold of SCN support. I think that I would agree on that comment. Excuse me for coming in here, Tanya, but I think that is very much about universal provision and us recognising that the best support takes place in the classroom. Francesca has then put the leaflet on, which actually provides parents with some really good questions to ask about what SCN support entails. What are your top tips, Tanya?
Actually, I'd just like to ask you, Erica, what would the last one where said you'd really tried to get hold of the parent and nobody was, they weren't forthcoming. I mean, you've been a SENCO for many years. What have you, you must have come across that yourself. What have you done in those circumstances?
I think it's trying, as you've said, various avenues. So it might be trying a text message, trying a phone message, email, often sometimes putting a letter in the child's bag, just a short note to say, can you get in touch with us, please? So it's just trying those different ways. Sometimes it's not always the Senko. Oftentimes someone like a teaching assistant might know the family, and they can be a good way in as well to engage.
Yeah, because I'd say, speaking, as a parent, when you get a call home, or you just think, oh my God, what's happened now? And so that fear might be enough to stop somebody coming back to you. So, which is why I said, always start with something good.
And I think that's where your point about culture change is so important, Tanya, is that it's about contacting parents, not just about your concerns, but also to highlight those positive experiences that the child is having in school, isn't it? And for that to become part of the culture of the school. So, I'm, let's say, so-and-so's PE teacher. We've had a great experience in PE today. So the child managed to take part in something or to do something. I'm an art teacher. I've seen a lovely piece of work produced. And it's having that culture of engaging with parents in a positive way.
I mean, lots of schools, certainly ours had a system where a teacher could put it up on a parent communication website. I can't remember what it was called now, and then the parent would get a notification and can just log in and read it.
Yeah.
So
I've got, can I just, before we move on, Jane has said that I ensure that it is not a surprise to parents. I ask teachers to communicate with all parents who are receiving additional support so they know targets. Parents are involved with referrals and then discuss what the SCN register is, as there can be a stigma. I have only had one parent refuse. So it's about that culture, isn't it, that you talk about in your 7 C's?
And particularly if it's a service family. My sister is a teacher in Suffolk, where there are many service families, and she's an SCN trained teacher. And she said they don't want to know because it's a stigma for them. So that puts another barrier towards supporting that child, particularly as those families can move around a lot. So you have to be really careful with how you approach them, and again try and explain that it's for the child's benefit. And she said, but often they will get back that there's nothing wrong with my child and I don't want to hear about it. I guess in those circumstances there really is a limit to what you can do if they refuse to even acknowledge there is an issue. And if anybody has come across that, I'd be interested to find out what they do, because I don't think just saying, well, they want to know, so hard luck. I don't think that's an option. But I do appreciate how hard that can be. Our support tips. Couple of things from the SEND Code of Practice. Schools should talk to parents regularly to set out clear outcomes and review progress towards them, discuss the activities and support that will help them achieve, and identify the responsibilities of the parent, the pupil, and the school. These discussions can build confidence in the actions being taken by the school and also strengthen the impact of SCN support by increasing parental engagement, which I'm sure you know. Treat your parent as you would another professional, which I've said. Don't assume parents equal problems when they arrive at the end of the day. I know what it feels like to be that parent. And you think, hello, yes. But it's welcome them, when they come there, you know, welcome them with a smile. That's all I can say. Ask them how they want to be kept up to date, whether it's a phone or email or WhatsApp or a mixture of them. So scenario 5, a child has a medical condition and spends a lot of time out of school, ill at home, or in a hospital. How can you best support them and their parent? Because you might say, well, it's hospital school, you know, nothing to do with me, but the hospital school often gives them very little, and they do need that kind of continuity from friends and from school. So what have you done in that situation before now? While we're waiting, Erica, what have you done?
I think that's one thing that we've learned a lot of lessons from the pandemic with this, Tanya. I think many schools now are in a situation where lessons are recorded on Google Classroom, because, as you know, absence rates have been so high with isolating. So I think that is really important to offer that. And I know I've found talking to students, particularly to sixth form students and dyslexic sixth form students, are really finding Google Classroom invaluable, because they can go back through their notes that are recorded. So I think things like that are helpful in terms of learning. But I think what's so important here, Tanya, is actually well-being and giving the child the opportunity to keep in touch with their classmates, whether that's with a communication book or something like that. And I don't think that we should forget about that in all this. I really do think it's important, that social interaction with children. We do have some comments coming up.
In fact, just to say that the latest attendance figures that just came out last week do show that this term it is children with SEND who have missed the most school again, which, you know, makes them doubly or triply at risk of missing out.
Yeah. Ben is saying that, you know, what the regulations say, that 15 days, either consecutively or cumulatively, don't think I can say that, should have planned provision. There are augmented resources like the no isolation virtual robots, etc. I know we've certainly used that in my last school with one child. That was found to be hugely supportive with two-way comms and everything. But I can see you've got your top tips up, Tanya.
Yeah. And these were specifically contributed for by my co-director, Renata Blower, whose own child has spent large chunks of period in hospital. And she has been a go-between between the school and bringing homework down, because, you know, hospital school, while it's a nice place to go sometimes, if you're able, obviously sometimes the child is too ill to do anything, they need that continuation of the curriculum and of their friends, as you said. So there is specific guidance for children with medical conditions and children out of school through illness, and this includes anxiety, school avoidance. And parents do have an important role to play. And children, if they can also be involved in the decisions from the start. So ensure that they still get all school letters and information about events. My child once missed, couldn't go into the form room because they didn't like their class teacher, their form teacher, so they couldn't go in at the beginning and the end of the day. As a result, the teacher did not give them the information about a trip to Siemens, which my child would have adored, and they were devastated that they missed out on that. And that could have just been so avoided by making sure that they had that information. So it's ensure all letters and information goes home via school, via mail or email, and think about you or a familiar TA visiting the child if that is possible, or even via FaceTime these days, so they still feel part of the school. So
yeah, I'm just going to give you a little heads up on time. We've got
okay, well, we're done with the
5 minutes
scenarios.
left.
So this advice now is from parents given to me, what they think about co-production. One thing I would love to say to healthcare professionals and those involved in any SEND child's education is, please read the background information about a child properly before you write a report, and check your facts. This is really aimed more about to consultants as well as and people writing the HCPs. You know, make sure that they get the name right. Don't just copy and paste so you get the wrong child's name, which happens. And this parent says, if I had an audience with these SCN professional people, I would want them to know how desperate we get and how lost we get. We're thrown into a situation we know nothing about. We look to the professionals to help us, and we trust them. At our most vulnerable, we trust them. I and others I know have been let down at every turn. The school, the SENCO, CAMS. I started this SEN journey a very different person than I am now. And all I ever expected was honesty, but that was something that was a very rare find. I hope that wasn't too much whiplash for you for one day, and that there was some useful things in there. I know it can seem like, you know, that you're being told off in a way, but you're absolutely not, because I definitely appreciate how, particularly over the pandemic, how difficult it is. And I know my sister, she was having to do all sorts of differentiation one day and send stuff home, and she's never worked as hard as she has in her life, despite what the media has said. But I hope some of that was useful. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Tanya. It certainly encouraged me to reflect on how important it is, the relationship with parents. I am just now going to, hopefully this is sharing. I'm just as well going to just highlight some of the resources that Whole Schools send, and these resources are available on the SEND Gateway. This one, Demonstrating Inclusion tool, these are part of our review guides, and this is the opportunity for leaders in schools to demonstrate their inclusion. And there is a section on working with families within this, as there is within the SEND reflection framework, which helps you as a school to reflect on your practice. So it's definitely worth downloading these. As always, all Whole School SEND resources are free. And the very last resource I'm going to highlight is this one. It's a leaflet which was prepared with NHS England in conjunction with families, and it's called A Guide to Making Conversations Count for all families. And it really poses a series of questions for you as a parent to ask, but also for you as a school to review whether you can answer those questions. I'm going to come to the end of the session now. I'd just like to finish by thanking Tanya. That was really helpful, Tanya. Tanya, we have one last question from one of our delegates, Ben, who asks about the SEND review. Increasingly now at Whole School SEND, we're having questions about the forthcoming SEND review. He asks the question, how will it follow the principles of co-production when the steering group is not wholly representative of families? Do you have any answers to that, Tanya, or any advice as to what parents can do? It's a big question for the end of the session.
Well, thank you for asking. Yes, there are two parents on the SEND Review Steering Group. They are both from the NNPCF, that's the National Network of Parent Carer Forums, that is funded by the government. They would insist that they, will say what needs to be said. But the group that I co-founded, SEND Community Alliance, which is a collective of parent groups, are pushing hard to be included. We have had, and we are having, regular meetings with the SEND Review team and with the Minister as well. We've got another one on December the 6th. So they are listening to us. They have been quite stung, I think, by allegations that they're not co-producing, or they're not speaking openly or transparently. So I think that there is a new team in charge, and they aim to do that more. There was a link that came around that we on social media last week with an email address for the SEND Review team. So if we can get that and send it out to delegates, I mean, I'm sure I can fish it out for you. If anybody wants to actually email them themselves, please do. Yeah, so we are pushing to be included as independent parents, because I think there is a suspicion around parent carer forum, because some of them are run by local authorities. So yeah, we would like to be included. And it does seem to be a very high level. I think they need some more, coalface teaching staff on there as well. So it's a very good question. We're trying. I would love it if you would email and say the same things, because they do listen now, it seems. If you think that there's no young people's representative either. So that's a huge omission. So hopefully that if you lobby them, they may listen.
Thank you. And at that point, I think we've come to the end of the session. So thank you everyone for taking part. Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Francesca. Your speed of adding links is amazing. So thank you, everyone, and good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.